Kellyanne Conway leaned forward, her eyes narrowing, as though she were about to deliver the final blow of the night. A stack of papers rustled in her hand, numbers circled in ink, statistics she had rehearsed 1,000 times. Her tone dripped with certainty, the kind of smug confidence that comes not from truth, but from the sheer belief that no one will dare interrupt. The audience leaned in, silent, captivated, waiting for the clash. Some wore smirks, convinced Conway was about to humiliate her opponent. Others shifted uneasily, bracing for impact. Across from her, Jasmine Crockett did not move. No nervous glance, no restless hand. She sat in her chair like stone, her expression unreadable, her body language calm. She let Conway talk, let her flood the stage with fact after fact, the cadence sharp, the confidence overflowing. Conway's voice rose with each line, as though she could command victory through volume alone. But Crockett's silence was louder. Her stillness was its own kind of power, the kind that unnerves, the kind that makes the crowd wonder, what does she know that we don't? The moment stretched like an elastic band pulled too tight. Conway pressed harder, slamming down her final undeniable fact with a smirk, then leaning back as if to say, checkmate. The audience drew in a collective breath. Some glanced toward Crockett, expecting stammering, retreat, anything to confirm Conway's dominance. Instead, Crockett tilted her head ever so slightly. Not in defeat, not in hesitation, but with the faintest hint of amusement. She hadn't been cornered. She hadn't been shaken. She had been waiting. The silence broke when a single, almost imperceptible smile crossed Crockett's lips. And in that split second, before she even spoke a word, the crowd realized something they hadn't expected. The tables were about to turn. What came next didn't just surprise Conway. It didn't just rattle the audience in that room. It flipped the stage on its head. But to understand why this exchange hit so hard, why the air seemed to crackle as Crockett finally leaned forward, we need to step back. For years, Kellyanne Conway had carved out a reputation as a master of spin. She wasn't just a political figure. She was a veteran of the verbal battlefield, known for turning contradictions into weapons and transforming doubt into confidence, with nothing more than quick tongue and sharper posture. Television producers adored her because she brought drama, tension, and, above all, the illusion of certainty. Viewers at home often marveled at how she could bulldoze through questions, pile statistics into walls of noise, and walk away appearing unscathed. Her brand was dominance, and her weapon of choice was facts, or what she liked to call them. That's why this particular stage mattered so much. This wasn't a casual TV appearance or a friendly interview. It was a televised political panel, live and unfiltered, the kind of forum where every pause and every eye roll could become a viral clip by morning. The backdrop was a crowded hall filled with political insiders, reporters, and everyday citizens, the kind of mixed audience where reputations were either built or dismantled. Cameras scanned the room, broadcasting every reaction to millions watching at home. In that environment, power was measured not just by words, but by presence, by the ability to hold an audience under the weight of your voice. Conway entered this setting with a strategic advantage. Her notoriety preceded her. Many in the audience had already decided what they were about to see, Conway sharpening her blades, and Crockett struggling to keep up. After all, Jasmine Crockett was still a rising figure, a name that carried growing weight, but not yet the unshakable armor of someone who had weathered years in the national spotlight. For some, she was expected to play defense, to fight merely to survive the encounter. But the stakes weren't just personal. They were layered, symbolic, almost historic. This wasn't only about two women sparring with words. It was about representation. It was about whether a black woman from Texas, carrying the lived experiences of communities too often dismissed, could stand toe-to-toe against one of the most infamous political operatives in recent memory. It was about dignity versus distortion, truth versus manipulation, authenticity versus performance. The tension in the hall was almost unbearable. Each time Conway fired off a statistic, murmurs rippled across the audience. Each time she smirked, a few heads nodded in agreement, while others rolled their eyes in silent frustration. Crockett, still silent, sat like a storm gathering at the horizon, giving away nothing. And yet, the expectations remained lopsided. Viewers on Twitter posted before the exchange even began, predicting Conway would dominate. Commentators whispered into microphones, sketching outlines of a victory lap for her. Even those who supported Crockett braced themselves, unsure if she could withstand the verbal barrage of a practiced spin doctor. But this imbalance of expectation was exactly what made the moment explosive, because it set the stage for the unexpected. It made the silence before Crockett's first words feel heavier, more loaded. It created the sense that Conway was building a tower higher and higher, a tower that could come crashing down with one carefully aimed strike. Everyone thought Kellyanne Conway had the upper hand. Everyone thought the fact warrior was about to leave her opponent in shambles. But then Jasmine Crockett opened her mouth, and in that instant, the entire room realized the story wasn't going to unfold the way they imagined. Kellyanne Conway's name had long been synonymous with a certain kind of political theater. For decades, she operated in the shadows and under the spotlights, crafting strategies for Republican candidates, fine-tuning their language, and teaching them how to weaponize words like blades. She wasn't just a strategist. She was a performer, someone who understood the rhythm of television and the psychology of persuasion. In Conway's world, facts weren't immovable truths. They were tools, malleable and flexible, meant to be bent until they served the story she wanted to tell. Her rise to national fame came when she stepped into the Trump campaign, transforming herself from an insider consultant into a household name. Suddenly, she wasn't just shaping messages for others. She was delivering them herself, front and center on television screens across America. Millions watched her dodge questions with surgical precision, twist contradictions into clever phrasing, and grin her way through the most hostile interviews. She became notorious for introducing the phrase alternative facts, 3 words that crystallized her approach to politics. It wasn't about what was true. It was about what could be spun into sounding true. And for a long time, it worked. News anchors fumbled against her quick retorts. Opponents sighed in frustration as she steamrolled over them with a torrent of words, rattling off numbers, half-truths, and cherry-picked statistics at a speed designed to overwhelm. In debates, her style was to dominate not through substance, but through sheer momentum. She would fire off talking points rapid-fire, barely pausing, forcing her adversaries into defensive postures where they were left explaining instead of attacking. By the time they regained their footing, Conway had already shifted the conversation. It was classic misdirection, honed to perfection. But that style carried with it an unmistakable arrogance. She believed she could out-talk anyone. She thrived on control, on being the one who dictated the rhythm and tone of an exchange. To her, victory didn't require truth. It required confidence, delivered with enough conviction to drown out doubt. And the media landscape, hungry for spectacle, rewarded her for it. Clips of her clashes went viral, not because she was right, but because she was relentless. Yet behind the curtain of slick sound bites lay controversy after controversy. She had been accused of manipulating not only facts, but entire narratives, framing inconvenient truths as biased reporting, reframing lies as differences in interpretation. Her career was a tapestry woven with spin. Statistics about crime, immigration, economics, all weaponized, distorted, repackaged to suit her argument in the moment. Critics called her dangerous, a professional gaslighter who could look a camera straight in the lens and deny reality with a smile. Supporters, however, admired her audacity, calling her sharp, resilient, even brilliant. This duality made her a formidable antagonist. On one hand, she embodied the cunning and craftiness of political warfare. On the other, she embodied the arrogance that comes from believing you can bend reality forever without consequence. And that arrogance often showed in the way she treated opponents. Dismissive smirks, condescending tones, subtle digs aimed not only at their arguments, but at their credibility, their intelligence, even their worthiness to be in the arena with her. So when she sat across from Jasmine Crockett, Kellyanne Conway carried the weight of that entire persona. To the audience, she wasn't just another debater. She was the spin master, the fact warrior who had faced down some of the toughest interviewers in the country and lived to grin about it. Her reputation preceded her like a cloak of invincibility. And in that moment, it seemed she believed the same tactics would work again. She believed she could corner Crockett with facts, overwhelm her with numbers, and paint her into a corner where silence or stuttering would be inevitable. To Conway, Crockett wasn't an equal. She was another name on the long list of people who had underestimated her barrage of words and walked away battered. But arrogance has a way of blinding. Conway didn't see what the audience was starting to sense. She didn't see that her tricks, her spin, her practiced routines were about to meet someone who refused to play the game on her terms. She didn't see the calm strength in Crockett's eyes, the unshakable composure that stood in sharp contrast to her theatrical aggression. For years, Kellyanne Conway had thrived in spaces where control was hers to seize. But what happens when her spin collides with Crockett's steel? Before Jasmine Crockett ever stepped under the harsh lights of a national stage, she was already forged in fire. Her story was not one of privilege or inherited power, but of grit, discipline, and relentless perseverance. Born and raised in Texas, Crockett learned early what it meant to be underestimated. She knew the sting of people writing her off, dismissing her voice, assuming she didn't belong at the table. Instead of letting that break her, she let it sharpen her. Every slight became fuel. Every obstacle became another reason to push harder. She carried those lessons with her into the courtroom. As an attorney, she didn't just practice law. She wielded it as a weapon for justice. She defended those who didn't have the money, the influence, or the connections to fight back on their own. She faced off against prosecutors, corporations, and bureaucratic systems that thrived on intimidation. Time and again, she stood up for the vulnerable, the overlooked, and the voiceless. Those battles taught her how to stay calm when the stakes were high, how to keep composure when her opponents tried to rattle her with aggression or technical jargon. Every cross-examination was training for moments like this. Every hostile witness who tried to dodge her questions, every attorney who tried to drown her arguments in noise, they all prepared her for what it would be like to face someone like Kellyanne Conway. Crockett learned the art of patience. She learned that sometimes the most devastating response wasn't the loudest, but the calmest. She developed the ability to take hostility aimed at her and redirect it, turning the weight of her opponents' words back against them. Her unapologetic boldness didn't come from arrogance, but from survival. Crockett understood that when you are a black woman in positions of power, your mere presence can be seen as defiance. She embraced that reality. Instead of softening her edges to make others comfortable, she sharpened them. She spoke plainly, without dressing up her convictions in political euphemisms. She wore her identity with pride, knowing it carried the weight of history and the aspirations of those who saw themselves reflected in her. And yet, beneath her toughness was empathy. She carried with her the stories of her clients, the struggles of her community, and the sacrifices of her own journey. Every victory she earned wasn't just personal, it was collective. It was a message to every young person who had ever been told they weren't smart enough, strong enough, or polished enough to lead. Yes, you are. That combination, steel and empathy, made Crockett uniquely powerful. She didn't need to match Conway's rapid-fire talking points or drown the stage with statistics. Her strength was in her ability to hold steady while the storm raged, to let arrogance collapse under its own weight, and then, with precision, deliver a response so clear and undeniable it left no room for spin. By the time she arrived at this debate, Crockett had already faced challenges that dwarfed the theatrics of a televised clash. She had fought uphill battles in courtrooms where the odds were stacked against her. She had navigated political spaces where her presence was questioned, where whispers followed her down hallways, where opponents underestimated her at every turn. And in each of those spaces, she proved that underestimation was her greatest weapon. When people assumed she couldn't win, they relaxed, and that's when she struck. This is what made her so dangerous to someone like Kellyanne Conway, because Crockett wasn't just another politician or panel guest. She was a fighter molded by struggle, an advocate refined by years of standing her ground when the world told her to sit down. Every ounce of her resilience, every scar from every fight, was with her in that chair the moment Conway leaned forward with her so-called facts. And Crockett knew, deep in her bones, that she wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for every viewer who had ever been silenced in a conversation by someone louder, smoother, or more privileged. She was speaking for every person who had been cornered by arrogance, overwhelmed by a flood of words meant to confuse rather than clarify. She was speaking for those who watched, wishing they could deliver the perfect comeback, and finally seeing someone do it on their behalf. That's why she could sit still when Conway rattled off her statistics. That's why she could smile instead of flinch. Crockett wasn't rattled, because this was familiar territory. She had been underestimated her whole life, and she had learned to weaponize that underestimation into victory. In that room, in that moment, Crockett wasn't just Jasmine the attorney, or Jasmine the politician. She was every underestimated voice wrapped into one. She was dignity embodied, patience owned, resilience personified. And that is why, when the clash reached its breaking point, it wasn't Kellyanne Conway's spin that owned the moment. It was Jasmine Crockett's deal. Which is exactly why this moment became hers. The clash began the way Conway always wanted it to begin, with her in control. She leaned in, shoulders squared, eyes darting from her notes to the crowd, then back to Jasmine Crockett. Her words came fast, sharp, a relentless cascade of statistics and claims. Crime numbers here. Economic percentages there, a selective poll, cited as though it were scripture. She built her argument like a machine gun, rapid fire, precise, designed not to be absorbed but to overwhelm. Congresswoman Crockett, she said with a smirk, you can't argue with the facts. The audience shifted uneasily. Some leaned forward, nodding as Conway's words pounded the stage. Others frowned, skeptical but silent, waiting to see if Crockett could withstand the storm. The rhythm was familiar to anyone who had ever seen Conway at work. She didn't pause long enough for rebuttal. She didn't breathe long enough for interruption. She monopolized the soundscape, piling on so much noise that truth itself was suffocated beneath the weight of her spin. But Jasmine Crockett did not interrupt. She did not interject, did not flinch, did not even blink. She sat still, her hands folded lightly on the desk in front of her, as though she were in no rush at all. Her gaze never left Conway, watching her the way a seasoned attorney watches a witness, letting them dig their own hole deeper with every frantic word. The contrast was jarring. Conway's energy was frantic, almost desperate in its performance of dominance. Crockett's energy was calm, steady, even playful. And that calmness unnerved people. Members of the audience began glancing at one another, whispering under their breath, "Why isn't she fighting back? Doesn't she see Conway is cornering her?" The tension rose with every passing second. Conway sensed the silence and mistook it for weakness. Her voice grew louder, her body language bolder. She leaned across the table, jabbing the air with her finger for emphasis, stacking one fact on top of another. "This isn't my opinion," she declared, her tone dripping with self-assured triumph. "This is data. Cold, hard data. And unless you're willing to deny reality itself, you don't have a leg to stand on." The room was a pressure cooker. Viewers at home felt it too, the mounting imbalance, the growing sense that Crockett was trapped in Conway's barrage. Every second of silence added weight to the expectation that Crockett would finally stumble, that she would lose her composure, that Conway's storm of words would finally knock her off balance. And yet, Crockett's face betrayed none of it. She tilted her head slightly, as if amused. Her lips curled into the faintest suggestion of a smile, as though she were watching a performance she'd already seen 100 times before. Her stillness, her patience, became louder than Conway's raised voice. But Conway didn't see it. She mistook that silence for victory and pressed harder. She repeated herself, hammering her points with increasing aggression, each word meant to drive Crockett into retreat. She thought she was pushing her opponent back. She didn't realize she was setting herself up. The audience didn't realize it either. They sat on edge, some squirming in discomfort, others clapping nervously at Conway's punchlines, all of them waiting for Crockett's inevitable slip. The pressure was unbearable, the imbalance glaring. Conway had consumed the stage, and Crockett had given nothing in return. And then, Crockett flipped the script. The silence hung in the air like a taut string, stretched to the breaking point. Conway's voice had filled the stage for minutes, her statistics stacked high like bricks in a wall she believed was impenetrable. But Crockett's composure, her stillness, told another story. She wasn't trapped. She wasn't cornered. She was waiting. And when she finally leaned forward, the entire room shifted. Her voice didn't boom. It didn't rush. It slid into the space with calm precision, soft enough that the audience had to lean in, strong enough that Conway's noise suddenly felt clumsy in contrast. "Kellyanne," she began, steady and deliberate, "you've said a lot tonight. Numbers, percentages, polls, I've heard them all. But let's take a closer look at what you're really saying." There was no hostility in her tone, only control. It was the voice of someone who had cross-examined hostile witnesses, someone who had watched them unravel when forced to sit with the weight of their own words. Crockett's calmness was surgical, the patience of a scalpel waiting to cut. She picked up the first fact Conway had thrown onto the stage and held it up for inspection. Conway had cited crime statistics, suggesting rising lawlessness in cities represented by Democrats. Crockett let the claim breathe for a moment, then dismantled it piece by piece. "Yes, crime has increased in certain areas," she conceded, "but what you didn't mention, what you conveniently left out, is that the same trend is happening in Republican-led districts too. In fact, some of the highest increases are in states governed by your party. Crime isn't red or blue. It's a challenge we all face. But spinning it as if one side is solely responsible, that's not truth. That's manipulation." A murmur rippled across the audience. Conway's smirk faltered just slightly, her jaw tightening as she prepared to reload. But Crockett wasn't done. She turned to the second fact, an economic percentage Conway had tossed out to argue that working-class families were suffering more under Democratic policies. Crockett didn't flinch. "You mentioned percentages, Kellyanne. Let's talk about people. Because behind every number you're throwing around are real families, families that have seen wages rise, healthcare expand, and jobs created in industries your party tried to block. Statistics mean nothing if you strip away the human story behind them. You're not fighting for facts, Kellyanne. You're fighting for spin." This time, the room didn't just murmur. Gasps and nods broke out, the energy beginning to shift. Conway fidgeted, her hand gripping the edge of the desk. Then Crockett went for the third. Conway had cited polling data, boasting about percentages that supposedly showed the public siding with her perspective. Crockett smiled, slow and deliberate, before answering. "Polls," she said, her tone edged with quiet amusement. "Polls change with the wind. You know it. I know it. One week it's up, the next week it's down. But here's what doesn't change: people's lived reality. And the reality is, no matter what poll you cite, folks see through empty numbers when their rent is due, when their health is on the line, when their dignity is under attack. You can hide behind statistics all night long, but people know the truth when they live it every day." That was the strike that landed hardest. The audience erupted, clapping, cheering, even a few whistles slicing through the tension. For the first time all evening, Conway flinched. It wasn't just the words. It was the authority with which they were delivered, the way Crockett reframed the debate entirely. The shift in energy was unmistakable. Conway had spent the night building a fortress out of numbers, but Crockett had shown those walls were paper-thin. She had absorbed every blow, waited until the noise had peaked, and then dismantled 3 of Conway's central arguments with calm, surgical precision. But Crockett wasn't finished. She wasn't content with dismantling Conway's facts. She was ready to redefine the entire exchange. "Kellyanne," she continued, her voice gaining just enough volume to command the room without ever rising to a shout, "this isn't about your facts. This isn't about your percentages or your polls. This is about dignity. This is about the truth that people can feel in their bones, no matter how many numbers you throw at them to distract from it." She let the words hang, her eyes locked on Conway's, unwavering. The room was silent again, but this time it wasn't tense with anticipation. It was heavy with awe. You want to talk about facts? Crockett pressed on. Here's a fact. You've built your career twisting reality until people can't tell what's true anymore. You call it strategy. You call it clever. But the truth is, it's deception. And another fact? We're not falling for it anymore. Conway shifted in her seat, her smirk on, her eyes darting as though searching for a new weapon. But the balance of power had already flipped. Crockett leaned back slightly, not triumphant, not smug, but certain. Her authority didn't come from volume, but from conviction. She had shifted the debate away from Conway's fortress of spin and planted it firmly in the soil of truth, dignity, and human experience. And then she delivered the line that sealed the moment. You can stack papers on this desk all night, Kellyanne. You can bury us in numbers, polls, and percentages. But here's the difference between me and you. I don't need to bend reality to win an argument. I just need to tell the truth. And the truth. She paused, letting the silence stretch, letting every ear in the room lean closer. The truth is standing right here, and you can't spin your way past it. The crowd erupted. Applause thundered through the hall, echoing into the cameras, bouncing across the internet in real time. Conway sat frozen, her fortress crumbling around her, her weapon of choice turned to ash in her hands. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just countered. She hadn't just defended herself. She had flipped the stage, redefined the fight, and left her opponent with nothing left to say. It was the mic drop moment of a night, the kind of moment that doesn't just win a debate, but carves itself into memory. And as the cheers swelled, as Conway stared into the silence she had once commanded, one thing was undeniable. The stage no longer belonged to Kellyanne Conway. It belonged to Jasmine Crockett. The debate may have ended on stage, but its true explosion happened online. Within minutes of Crockett's mic drop line, phones were out, clips were clipped, and hashtags lit up screens across the country. What started as murmurs in the audience transformed into a roar on social media, echoing far beyond the walls of the debate hall. The first hashtag to catch fire was simple, sharp, and unforgettable. Hashtag CrockettFlip. By the end of the night, it was trending nationwide. Within hours, it had gone global. Users began pairing the tag with gifs of Crockett leaning in, with still images of Conway mid-flinch, and with captions like, "When you thought you had the facts, but forgot about the truth." Memes flooded in. One viral image showed Conway stacking blocks labeled alternative facts, only for Crockett to knock them down like a Jenga tower with the caption, "Steady hands always win." Another clip looped the exact second Crockett delivered her line about truth, adding dramatic sound effects. Some synced it with explosions, others with slow-motion applause. The internet had crowned a victor, and it wasn't even close. Commentators jumped in fast. Political analysts on cable networks scrambled to recap what had just happened, many admitting on air that they hadn't seen it coming. Kellyanne Conway has a history of spinning her way out of corners, one pundit noted. But tonight, Jasmine Crockett didn't just corner her. She dismantled her playbook. Celebrities added fuel to the fire. Well-known actors, comedians, and musicians tweeted their reactions, amplifying the clip to millions more. A popular comedian wrote, "Kellyanne brought a calculator. Jasmine brought the truth. Guess who won?" A musician added, "This wasn't a debate. This was a masterclass." Every share, every reaction, added to the validation layer that Crockett wasn't just seen as strong. She was celebrated as iconic. And that is why her mic drop moment struck so deeply. It wasn't simply a political win. It was a moral one. It reminded people that they, too, could flip the script when cornered. That they didn't have to match arrogance with arrogance or noise with noise. That patience, clarity, and courage often carry more force than the fastest tongue or the loudest voice. It's an empowering message, one that transcends the stage it happened on. Whether you're a student standing up to a dismissive professor, an employee asserting your worth in front of a domineering boss, or simply someone in a heated argument with a friend or family member, the Crockett Flip reminds you, you don't have to play their game to win. Dignity is not weakness. Patience is not passivity. And calm is not surrender. These qualities, when sharpened by preparation and anchored in truth, become a force that arrogance cannot withstand. In the end, Crockett's victory was about more than silencing Conway. It was about reminding everyone watching that truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. It just needs to stand steady. Kellyanne Conway tried to corner Jasmine Crockett with a wall of so-called facts. She leaned on the strategy that had carried her through years of political combat: overwhelm, dominate, control the narrative. But instead of folding under pressure, Jasmine did something unforgettable. She flipped the stage. That moment wasn't just about two women trading lines on a panel. It was about the battle between arrogance and authenticity, between manipulation and truth. And when the dust settled, it was clear. Crockett's composure carried more weight than Conway's spin ever could. Because, in the end, truth doesn't need 1,000 statistics. It doesn't need to twist itself into alternative facts. Truth speaks through clarity, through courage, through the refusal to be bullied into silence. That's why this exchange still resonates, not just as a viral clip, but as a reminder of what real strength looks like. For every person who has been dismissed, underestimated, or talked over, Crockett's flip was a signal. You don't have to fight dirty to win. You can hold your ground, let arrogance tire itself out, and strike with dignity. That's how truth outshines manipulation. That's how resilience defeats distortion. And if you're watching this, chances are you know how much voices like Crockett's matter in today's world. Voices that rise not to spread spin, but to cut through it. Voices that remind us we don't have to accept noise as power. So here's the call. If you believe in voices like Crockett's, share this story. Subscribe, and let's keep truth louder than lies. Because this moment wasn't just Jasmine Crockett's. It belongs to everyone who refuses to be silenced, and to everyone ready to flip the stage when it matters most.